Hello, my name is David Caspel, and I'm a full maintenance editor with the Missouri School Boards Association. In this video, we're going to do a deep dive into the Simbli editor, and we're going to talk about what Simbli is and how you and your full maintenance editor will use it to maintain and update your district's policy manual. Let's start by talking a little bit about what Simbli is. In the past, I've said that Simbli is an online policy maintenance platform, but what does that really mean? In essence, Simbli is a combination of an online hard drive that you can access from any smart device, a word processor, similar to Word or WordPerfect, that you can use to create marked up drafts to present to your board, and a front-facing policy manual that is visible to members of the public without a login from any smart device. That last part means that it eliminates the need for a printed manual because since it is available to the public and almost everyone has smart devices these days, Simbli satisfies the requirements of the Missouri Sunshine Law because your policies and procedures will be visible to any member of the public from any smart device without a login, thus eliminating the need for a printed manual. Let's talk about how I would go about making a change to a document in Simbli. Say, for example, my superintendent has requested a revision to procedure ADF AP1. The first thing I will do, of course, is I will log into Simbli. Now, since I am making a change to procedure ADF1, I'm going to go over here to the code column. I'm going to type in ADF. And there it is, the District Wellness Program. So I will open that up and we'll talk a little bit about how I might go about making that change. So very often, the easiest option is the one with which we are most familiar. And one of the things that we want to stress to you above all else is that you do not need to make edits to your documents yourself if you do not want to. And in fact, in some ways, it is recommended that you do not try to make edits to your own documents. This is because the Simbli editor can be difficult to work with. It is an HTML editor, and if you are not familiar with HTML code, you may find it difficult to make more complex changes. We'll talk a little bit more about what kind of changes you can make on your own and what kind of changes you should leave to your editor. But just know at this stage, working in the editor yourself is always optional, and there will definitely be times where you will not want to do that. And if you do not want to work in the editor, the easiest and best way to make changes to your document is to email those to your full maintenance editor. You've done that before. It's the same thing that you've been doing for years. And by this point, almost everybody knows how to email. Essentially, just type out the changes that you want in your email using as much detail as you can, and your editor will then create a draft for you that shows those changes using highlight and strikeout. And that's something you can then take before your board for them to approve or decline. So for example, let's say I wanted to change where it says the district is committed to ensuring that all foods and beverages sold, provided, or made available to students on school campuses, etc. If I wanted to change that to the district is committed to ensuring that all comestible items sold, provided, or made available to students on school campuses during the school day. If I wanted to make that change, all I would have to do is write that in an email to my editor, and then my editor would produce a draft, and we'll look at drafts a little bit more later on, and I'll show you what they look like, that I could then go into Simbli and download or print to take to my board. But if I want to make that change to myself, I've navigated to ADF1AP1. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to click my pencil icon to open the editor. You can see here we have our toolbars here over on the left-hand side. There's obviously a lot of options. And some of these are going to be similar to what you would find in Word or WordPerfect. For example, right here you can see these set your alignment for your text to left justified, center justified, right justified, and full justified. If you mouse over any of these, it'll tell you what you're looking at. So what's this paintbrush icon? If I mouse over it, I can see it's copy formatting. If I want to know what this is, this is replace. This is useful, find and replace. So obviously there's a lot here to take in. We're not going to cover every one of these tools today. Just know that probably a lot of them you may not want to use. Things like you should avoid changing the size. You really should avoid changing styles, changing format, unless you're setting a heading. And we'll look at that here in a minute as well. The reason that I'm glossing over these is because generally speaking, If I'm looking at any of these things and wanting to use them, then it's probably a change that my editor should be making, that I should notify my editor of with email rather than trying to do myself. And there are a lot of reasons why you want to be very cautious about editing these documents. First and foremost is that they are legal documents that represent your district's publicly stated policies. So when a member of the public comes to your district Simbli site and looks at the policies that are visible to them, they are seeing your district's policy manual. That essentially, once you publish a document to your Simbli site, your district is officially endorsing the contents of that document. And if you have made changes to those that you didn't intend, or of which the board or your administration was not notified, that represents a serious problem that can cost your district a lot of money and time in the future. So if I want to make edits to this document myself, the first thing that I want to do after opening the editor, this is a critical step, absolute first thing before I do anything else, is I want to turn on track changes. If I move my mouse here, I can mouse over this little pencil icon. It says start tracking changes. Now you can see that the icons to the right of this are grayed out. That indicates to me that I have not started tracking changes yet. If I click on this button, you'll see that all of those options are now available. And if I mouse over these, I can see what they do. And we'll cover these in a little bit more detail in a moment. But just know, if you open a document and you see these grayed out, it means you have not turned on track changes yet. You absolutely want to do that every single time you begin editing a document. The reason for that will hopefully become clear in a moment. All right, another thing to know is that if you are working with an existing draft that your editor has created, when you open it, by default, track changes will be turned on. So just be aware of that. Okay, so I have turned on track changes. Now I want to start making revisions to my document. The first thing I'm going to do is you can see I have a very limited amount of space to look at here. There are a couple of ways that I can increase my screen real estate that I can view my policy in. First thing I can do is I can look down here in the lower right-hand corner of this window. I can find my resize. Again, I'm mousing over this and it shows me resize. I'm going to click and drag on this and I'm going to pull it up or down. And you can see that this is changing the size of my view window in which I see the content of my policy. Another thing that I can do if I want to expand my view, since I'm not putting anything in my subtitle here and I'm not yet using anything lower on the page, I want to expand my policy content to fill the entire screen. And I can do that by clicking on Maximize, which is this icon in the upper right-hand corner of the toolbar that looks like 4 arrows facing outward from a central point. I'm going to click on that, and you can see that has now expanded my policy content to fill my entire screen. If I want to go back out of this, I can click on Maximize again, and I'm back to my original view. So I've turned on track changes, I've maximized my screen, now I want to start making my revisions. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to find the part of the policy that I want to change, which is this right here. I'm going to highlight the text that I want to replace. I'm going to do that by clicking and dragging. I can either click and drag over, or I can double click and then drag. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the text I'm removing by highlighting it and pressing backspace on my keyboard. And then I'm going to move my cursor to the right of the removed text. The Simbli editor can be a little bit finicky. So if I, for example, let's say that I just highlight this and just start typing, sometimes it will work. In this case, it chose to put my highlighted text before the strikeout text. Sometimes, though, you're going to run into situations where the editor will decide on almost seemingly on its own to put your cursor someplace else. It's unpredictable, so I can't necessarily demonstrate it right now, but it is something you need to be aware of. Sometimes if I highlight my text and I just start typing, Simbli will decide to put the text at the end of the paragraph. I wish I could tell you why that is, but it can happen and it's something to be aware of. So you want to be very deliberate with the placement of your cursor when you're working in Simbli. So I'm going to highlight foods and beverages, I'm going to backspace to delete, and then I'm going to place my cursor to the right of this removed text by clicking right here. I can also use my arrow keys. If I press right arrow, I move my cursor to the right. If I press left arrow, I move my cursor to the left. If I use the down arrow, it moves down a line. If I use the up arrow, it moves up a line, and so on. I'm going to place my cursor to the right of my text, and I'm going to start typing. Now you can see that the text that I'm removing is highlighted in red and struck out. and the text that I'm adding is highlighted in green. And that is to show the board that foods and beverages is being removed and comestible items is being added. You're probably familiar with this because MSBA policy has been providing your district with what we call reference copies for a long time now, using strikeout and highlight to show what's being added and removed. Simbli does the exact same thing. It creates the exact same ref copies, only it uses slightly different colors to distinguish between text that is being removed and text that is being added. Now, it's important to note that at this point, these changes have not actually been made to this policy. I am creating a ref copy. Previously, your editor would have been the only person who would have been able to do that for you. You would not have been able to do it for yourself. And again, I want to stress, don't feel like you need to do it for yourself. In fact, if you are not comfortable using an HTML editor like Simbli, I would really encourage you to make full use of your human full maintenance editor and let them create ref copies for you. We're very happy to do that. But in this case, I have struck out the text I want to remove. I've highlighted the text I want to add. So let's talk a little bit about some other changes that you might be called upon to make. So let's say I want to add a list item to fundraising exemption to nutrition guidelines. I move my cursor here, and then I can return down, and I can start typing. Now you may notice that the number over here is not highlighted. That is because the Simbli editor, it's still in its early stages with regards to tracking changes, even though that's an extremely important part of our work here at MSBA. And the track changes system does not work necessarily with the numbered list system. So in this example, it actually might be better for me to leave this to my editor. This is a complex change and things can get a little bit gnarly, for lack of a better term, when you're doing stuff like this. The same thing goes if I want to delete a list item. So let's say, for example, I want to delete these two list items. I highlight these and I hit delete. You can see they're struck out, but the numbers are not removed. So again, might be better for me to let my full maintenance editor do this for me, just because this is a little bit strange. I don't exactly know what I'm going to end up with here. The same thing goes if I want to add a header or remove a header or change formatting on something. Basically, if you are making changes just to the standard body text of your document, that is the kind of change that I would say you could safely make yourself. But really anything more complex than that, you should probably leave to your editor. And that includes things like adding or removing items from a numbered or bulleted list, adding or removing a heading from your document, or moving content from one place to another within your policy. Another thing to keep in mind is that there are certain changes that you could potentially try to make to your document that will hamper MSBA's policy update process. Our policies are written and arranged in a very specific way with the content in a very specific order. And that is because your full maintenance editor has to be able to locate custom content that your district may have placed in a policy. And if you start moving things around within that policy, like for example, if I move nutrition standards for meal programs, if I try to move this section down to the bottom of the nutrition guidelines section, that could potentially cause my editor to lose or miss that custom content. It could cause my updates to take longer. There's just a lot of reasons why things like that are really things you should run by your editor first. And you can do that by emailing your editor to request those changes. We'll talk a little bit about the association review system here in a little bit. But I would encourage you to, unless you're just making changes to the standard text content of your policy, I would encourage you to go through your full maintenance editor. Once I've made my changes, I'm going to minimize my editor window. I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom, and then I have a couple of options. The simplest one is going to be for me to click Save and Close. Now, a couple of things that you never want to do. You never want to check Approved, and you never want to check Rescind. If you check Approved, then when you save and close out of this document, you are publishing it to your district's policy manual. And that is something that you want to leave to your editor for a lot of the reasons that we've already talked about. Remember, these are policy documents, and so anything that happens to them reflects your district's stated position on some very important matters. So we want you to always let your editor be the one who publishes these documents. Never check Approved, never check Rescind. Never put a date here in this column. These are for your full maintenance editor only. So in order to create my ref copy, I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. I'm going to click Save and Close. And I'm saving a draft of this policy, and then I'm closing it. This takes me to the work in progress page where I can see all of the drafts that currently exist in my Simbli site. We've talked about this in previous videos. You can see here the status of this policy is draft, which means that it will not be visible to the public without a login. And if I want to then take my ref copy draft before the board, I can go about the process of printing it or downloading it. We've talked about that in other videos as well. Once the board has voted to approve or decline these changes, then you'll want to notify your full maintenance editor, who will then go through the process of cleaning up the document, removing all highlight and strikeout, and then we'll publish it to your manual where it will become visible to the public without a login and become part of your district's official policy manual. So let's say that I feel confident enough in the changes that I'm trying to make, that I've made them myself, but before I present this draft to the board, I want to make sure that everything I'm trying to do is legal. That is when we want to use the association review feature. Again, we've talked about that in previous videos. In order to use association review, you open your draft, you go down to the bottom of the page, click on Request Review by Association, then Save and Close, and that submits this document to your editor for review. Your editor will then go through the review process, and when they're finished, you'll get an email that contains their comments. Okay, so we've talked about how to use the Simbli editor today. Again, if you ever have any questions, if you would like a little bit of one-on-one training time with a full maintenance editor on how to use Simbli, we're more than happy to hear from you. And in closing today, I want to emphasize again that using the Simbli editor is entirely optional. It's really intended for users who have a moderate to high level of technical proficiency, and ideally for users who are comfortable using an HTML editor. If you run into problems while you're using the Simbli editor, even if you feel confident with it, always feel free to contact your full maintenance editor. We are happy to help. So I hope this has been informative, and I thank you for your time today, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future here at MSBA.